Hello everybody, welcome along. My name is Benjamin Bloom. This is the Benjamin Bloom Football Channel. Please leave your bias at the door and join us to discuss the Championship playoffs, what normally happens and what we think is going to happen this season. Thank you for everyone who watched yesterday as we looked at the top two. Here is the state of play currently in the playoffs. Huddersfield, Blackburn, QPR and Luton occupy those playoff positions. And yesterday I was very, very much looking at history and thinking, okay, Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, etc., etc. Today, I feel a little bit different, and there are a few reasons why we really could get some switching and swapping in those playoff positions. Look, the higher you go, the more games played, so the teams chasing have games in hand. And when I'm going back and doing my research here, we're judging from game 35 complete, so round 36 onwards. Look at the playing field, though, with the games in hand, the Omicron. Normally, things starting to even out now, and 3 game weeks, there's only a couple left, there's Easter, and then it's pretty sensible to the end of the season. There are a lot of variables this season that could mean some interesting switches and swapping that I do believe may happen, contrary to what I said about the top two yesterday. Let's have a look back into history. And historically, not much changes between game 35 and 46. Now, I have already outlined there are reasons why that may be different this season, particularly those Omicron postponements and the fact that we're a couple of games behind for a lot of teams this season. I think there's a bit of a myth, and it is perpetuated by the media. Normally, playoff myths go back to the 1990s, it has to be said, when the sort of tournament at the end of the season first came in. I will do a big video on playoff details and which myths need debunking. I think one of them is, quote, someone always makes a late run to get into the playoffs. No, they don't. They absolutely don't. It's actually quite a rarity. I've looked back the past 10 years, but we'll do a bit more detail. It can happen, but in terms of a late run out of nowhere, okay, you might see a team go from 7th or 8th and make up 2 or 3 points, but it is rare for the big zoom up. Remember this season, we don't necessarily need that much of a big zoom up though, do we? Given 10th place Coventry are only 3 points off the playoffs. It would be a big jump in places, not points. Here are the outliers, the 3 examples in the past 10 years of the fabled late run to the playoffs. Here is Fulham in 2016-17. It's only 1 place. Look, 7th to 6th. And yes, they do have a game in hand at that point. But it's a 5-point gap. And as I've just suggested, 7th to 6th that year was 5 points. And where does 5 points take you this year? All the way down to 11th. But Fulham under Jukanovic did go on a big run there. Take a look at Leeds in 4th. They're going to disappear down to 7th. Fulham are going to go up. We had a collapse. We had a great run from Fulham. Look at those last 6 games there. 16 points from the last 6 games. It should be said, Fulham did not win the playoffs that season. Who did? Huddersfield, didn't they? Aston Villa, this is the one. This is the one that all Championship fans will look at as their shining light, their example. It is the rarity. Look, 35 games played, 48 points, 11th place. 6 off the playoffs, so it's only 1 point more. But look at the traffic, and that was a vintage Championship year. And Aston Villa, woof, up they go into 5th position into those playoff spots. I think, who drops out? Bristol City and Middlesbrough. So you've got Derby moving up from 7th up 3 points as well. But Villa are the ones. However, I think the mitigating factors with Villa are obvious. A huge underperformance over the previous time in the Championship, a big spend, and Grealish, Abraham, Mings, all in that team. Yes, great achievement. I think they won 10 on the trot, didn't they? But more a regression to the mean than a late run out of nowhere, put it that way. Here comes Swansea in 1920. Look, they're 9th, and they are 5 points off Preston, who are in 6th. But it's Nottingham Forest who they're going to overtake, who are 8 points clear. So we do get a late Swansea run with Steve Cooper and Rhian Brewster and a Nottingham Forest collapse. And I'm sure we'll all remember that ridiculous last 30 minutes of the season where that goal difference and those points shift I think there's a 6-goal swing in the last 30, 40 minutes of the season. As Swansea lose 4-1, Swansea win 4-1 at Reading, Nottingham Forest lose 4-1 at home to Stoke, I believe, was the key there, and so tight. Look at that, 1 drawn, lost, all the same. Goal difference, 1 difference, points the same. Swansea in, Nottingham Forest out. We can get late runs to the playoff, and I will reiterate, this season it's much tighter, and some of those jumps I've just outlined wouldn't be necessary this season. Okay, let's have a look at the points per games projection. This is very simplistic. I've taken the points per games for the whole season, rolled it out towards the end. Then I've done it for the form table, so just the last 12 games, rolled it out to the end. Then I've averaged the two together. As I always say, I will present the data. How you choose to interpret it is up to you. I apologise in advance if it doesn't have your team in the playoffs, but it is what it is. It's pure numbers, and again, I reiterate, you interpret it how you see fit. Here is the seasonal points per game. It doesn't really change the table a hell of a lot at all. Obviously, the games in hand weighting doesn't knock Huddersfield and Blackburn down. So we essentially, with the seasonal points per game, have nobody change in place. So we don't learn too much in that regard. What we do learn is two things really. One, there could be a giant gap if everything plays out between second and third. And we could get a very, very high tide. The average points scored over the last 10 years for 7th place has been 71.7. So if you were above that, 72, over the last 10 years, you would be above 7th, ergo heading for those playoffs. But look, we got Sheffield United 73.88, Borough 72.48, and Forest and Coventry tied 71.09. Would all be missing out on over 70 points. So we could get, according to the season's form and rolling it out, we could get quite a few over 70s with a big gap between the playoffs and the top two. What does the recency bias tell us? Well, it tells us it's good news for Sheffield United. So they are in and Blackburn are out if the 12-game form table is more of an indication than the whole season. Who knows? It's all a little bit of a fun mathematical exercise, unless, of course, you're very emotional about your team and it's just knocked them out of the playoff positions. But what that does do as well is it has Huddersfield and Luton a lot closer to Bournemouth. Obviously, they're both in terrific form. Sheffield United have been as well, and they move up from 7th to 5th, in fact, in that table. QPR stay in. But, look how tight that is. That is 0.08 points with that type of projection from QPR down to Borough. And talk about a high tide. The 12-game form table style of projection till the end of the season has Borough, Forest and Blackburn all missing out on 75 points and above, which would be rather unlucky, you would imagine. I would indicate you back towards 2014-15, where I think did Wolves miss out with 78 or something ridiculous? It can happen. High tide, other parts of the table struggling, etc. Let's average that out. Does it change anything? Not a great deal. Blackburn still out. Sheffield United still in. Massively tight there with QPR and Blackburn. Look, 0.32 in terms of in and out. And I think the one thing we are learning from these projections, I know we'll get some smarty pants in the comments that will go, projections, the past never predicts the future. Yeah, I know, I get it. It's all a little bit of fun to try and indicate something tricky. What all the projections are saying, though, is a little bit of a high tide this season in terms of the normal points numbers on that 10-year average. Let's have a look at opponent difficulty here. So I've analysed who the opponents are for all of the playoff teams here. I've taken their position in the table. We haven't factored in points deductions to that. I don't believe it makes an opponent easier or harder just because they've had points deducted from them. We've also looked at it in terms of the last 12 games, that lovely useful form table as well. Now, what you do need to remember when you're looking at these is because we're averaging out on a scale of 1 to 24, decimals are important, and it does give you an idea of who's got the easiest run and who's got the hardest run. So looking at the top, Blackburn, apparently, according to the league table, for the whole season have the easiest run. Their average opponent is 13.75, which says in the main they're playing teams in the bottom half. The most difficult run there, Fulham and Coventry, if you can pick your team out in the middle there. Huddersfield, Luton, Borough, in terms of bottom half teams. On average, they'll be playing Sheffield United, Bournemouth, Forest, QPR, top half teams. In terms of the form table, Blackburn, well, apparently it gets even easier for them. QPR is then the hardest. I don't know whether that's a consideration for any QPR fans. That simple statistic there, if we take the position in the form table of the average opponents, QPR on that basis have the hardest run-in. I'm sure there are plenty of other caveats and variables you can throw into that though. Okay, let's try and make some conclusions on this incredibly complex, multivariant championship playoff situation. First conclusion is delayed schedule means a unique year. Now, I'm normally one that sits here and goes, right, what's happened in the past? Analyse it, see what that tells us, see how likely that is to not happen or happen in the future. But with this year and the Omicron surge in December and everybody having played different amounts of games and the schedule being stretched in the way it is, I do think we could get some quite unique results this season. I think we actually could get some teams swap places, even though history in a normal year tells us that normally at this point, 3 of the 4 teams that are currently in the playoffs are going to stay there. And maybe one team that's 7th or 8th might get in and swap places. I think it might be different this year. Projections suggest a high tide. Look, read into the projections what you will. They are factual in terms of that they're taking a number and rolling it out. The wisdom of them, again, is up to you. What they are telling us, though, those projections, are that there's a plausible possibility that we could get, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 teams above 73, 74 points, which would mean a higher tide than normal, and that 71.7 number over the last 10 years for 7th position. Could we get somebody missing out on a high number? Could we get a really tight 6th and 7th, both around, I don't know, 76, 77 points? The projections tell us that, and yes, somebody will drop off. Not everybody can keep winning, but the projections tell us that the number may well be high. Here's an interesting one. Financial overperformers high, underperformers low. Now, I know we have certain subscribers that get very upset with the term overperformers or underperformers. I'll leave that up to them. But if I link it to financial overperformers, then I'm kind of talking facts rather than opinions and emotions here. And what I'm saying is, in football, whether you like it or not, boring as it may be, more money generally correlates to more success over the course of decades and centuries. I think in most forms of life and competition, that tends to be the way. Sadly, as much as we would love the underdogs to come through, they often don't. What we have at the moment is a situation where perhaps the underdogs financially are higher up than the wealthier, more resource teams, which could potentially, if money does always run out, could mean we get some swaps. Of course, I'm talking about the likes of Luton, QPR, Blackburn, Huddersfield, who are not necessarily as moneyed as Sheffield United, Middlesbrough, Forest. Middlesbrough and Forest love a spend, don't they? And Sheffield United are a parachute team. Even lower down, West Brom, Stoke. West Brom are a parachute team as well. Stoke have spent big over recent years and been a parachute team. I think, generally speaking, if you've got the wealthier, more resource teams a bit lower and the more higher performing, punching above their weight type teams a bit higher, it could, if money does indeed always talk, it could intimate a change of place. The other thing that could intimate a change of place is the fact that 3rd place played 35, 4th place played 34, and then all the 33s. So the higher teams having played more games, contrary to the situation with Bournemouth, where they're higher and they've played less games, would suggest a possible change of place. Okay, should we try and make some predictions here? Now, you are going to be sorely disappointed if you want me to name 4 teams. It's just too difficult at this point. Feel free to stick your 4 teams in the comments. Maybe give some reasoning, but at the moment, anyone's guess is as good as anyone's. You pick 4 out of the hat and probably if I got my young baby daughter to do it, she'd have as much chance of being accurate as I. But what I do think is we could well get 2 in, 2 out. I'm not really sure enough to be able to say which 2 in, which 2 out. I'm going against history there in respects of that it would normally be 3 teams are going to be a lock now at this stage. But for all the reasons I've said, the fact that we're a little bit behind schedule because of that Omicron, the fact of the high tide, the fact of the way the game's in hand, and perhaps maybe some wealthier teams are below some less wealthy teams, if that makes an influence above them. Then you do also have the matter of recently Blackburn QPR trending down. They're higher up and trending down. And the likes of Luton, Sheffield United, Middlesbrough Forest trending up. It all intimates that we could possibly swap places. And it's so tight, isn't it? 51, 51, 52, 53, 54, 56, 57, 59, all the way up from 10th to 3rd. So do I feel confident to sit here and say which 4 teams are going to finish in the playoffs? No, absolutely not. If you feel confident enough to do that, please do it in the comments. I do think we could get 2 out, 2 in. And my 2 in would be from that 7th, 8th and 9th. That sounds like stating the bleeding obvious. It is Sheffield United, Middlesbrough and Forest. Could 2 of them get in? The Reds against the Blues this, isn't it? With QPR, Blackburn, Huddersfield in there and Luton possibly as well. Let me know who your final 4 are. Apologies, I'm going to get, oh, you're a fraud. You didn't say exactly which 4 teams. I can't get my head around it. But I do think this year, from all the research I've done into this year, out of all of them, is the one where you could get 2 in and 2 out. Which 2 is it going to be? Will there be any? Will we get the 4 that are in there already? Huddersfield, Blackburn, QPR and Luton. I don't know. Impossible to tell in the circumstances this year. Get your thoughts in via the comments. Hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. All of that good stuff. And it's a lovely big over and out from me. We're going to look at the relegation picture, hopefully, tomorrow.